Kamikaze is a tricky poem to write about. One of the reasons it's tricky is because of the way the story is structured and the way in which the narrative is told. The short video works with one key idea that I think distills some of that complexity. The idea is that there are differing time frames in the story. We have the now, in which a mother is recounting to her children the story of her father. We have the story of her father, who is the kamikaze pilot of the title, and we have the experience of his returning to his family and the implications of that for the differing generations. So I'm saying that there are different time frames and there are different layers to the story, and that those things kind of copy the way that memory works. Essentially, there was trauma for this family by the fact of a kamikaze pilot not choosing to die and returning home to that family, and all of the shame that he then encountered and they encountered as a result of his coming home. So this is how I believe the story works. If we scan down to the second stanza, is where we get our first kind of clue about where we are at the moment. So her father embarked at sunrise with a flask of water, a samurai sword in the cockpit, a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. This is what we might expect of a poem titled Kamikaze. It grounds us in the reality of what's actually happening here, which is that a pilot is heading out to commit suicide and taking out the enemy. This is where we get our first kind of big question, though. She thought, well, who is this she? Well, we learn that the she is recounting that story that's just been told to her children. And so what we have then is the story of this person telling our story here to a group of children. Possibly her own children. Okay. As the poem goes on, we learn, therefore, that what she is talking about is the story of her father, who was a kamikaze pilot, which I'm going to draw just here now. And so this is his tale. Now, the reason I'm drawing this out is because it gets quite complicated when we start to think about who is doing what and who is saying what and who is thinking what. So this is the kamikaze pilot here that's talked about in the first stanza. As the poem progresses, we then move on to think about what she believes he is thinking and what he is seeing. So the first thing that the woman who's telling the story focuses upon is what she believes that he must have seen. He must have, and this is a key quote, the must have, because that occurs again later on in the poem. So he must have looked down and seen fishing boats strung out like bunting and shoals of fish in the translucent sea who are swimming. And there's a lot of kind of powerful imagery in terms of the way that similes are used here, because the ships are described as being like bunting and the fish make a kind of figure of eight, the figure eight being auspicious in Japanese culture, and there's a slight irony here in bunting being something that's used for celebration. Okay, so this is what the mother, talking to her children, believes that her father saw. Okay, moving on then, as the mother talks to her children thinking about her father, she then imagines what he must have thought in order to make him make the decision to return home. So what I'm drawing here is a series of thought bubbles that show up here the thinking of the pilot. One of the things that the mother has a conjecture about what her father must have thought about that led to him turning the boat around is that he was waiting on the shore as a child for his father to return. And as they were waiting, they were building dams to try and withstand the sea, playing it a game that could be interpreted as metaphorical, kind of keeping away of external forces. And this is the Kamikaze pilot's father returning. Okay, and that's where we get here. So bringing their father's boat safe, yes, grandfather's boat. So this is where we understand that the woman telling the story now is focusing on her own father's father, grandfather. Okay. And then we are brought back at the end of the poem to the return from the conflict of the Kamikaze pilot to his home. So he completes a return to his children. But in his return, he finds that he is shunned by not only his wife, but also eventually his children. Okay, and one of these children being the person who tells the story to her children. Okay, so it's a complex narrative that is told across generations. Sorry, it's a complex narrative that mimics the workings of memory and shows the far-reaching impact of war upon the generations that follow. And this is our key idea about the poem Kamikaze.